Hoff Time Report. I'm not David Hasselhoff. So those of you tuning in who are hoping to see David Hasselhoff because of the halftime report, sorry,
Disappointed.
very disappointing. I'm disappointed because I'm not David Hasselhoff because he has a lot more money than me. For those of you who are younger than, say 30, he was very famous once. He was Knight Rider and Baywatch. Anyway, but that's not what we're here for. Priscilla Giddings is here. That means this show is rated PG. That was my dad joke for the evening. Welcome, Representative Giddings, to the
Hey,
program. How are you?
full throttle.
Yeah, you're full throttle because you're serving time in the legislature and you're serving time on the campaign trail. All those things are very, very difficult.
And a
Right.
mother of two.
And mother of two, the most important
Yes.
job of them all. And your
Yes.
kids are very young.
2 and 3.
What's it like being on the campaign trail and being in the legislature while you're taking care of your little ones?
It's busy, and my 2-year-old, she has learned to turn her tears into "I miss you, mom," and so I hear a lot of "I miss you, mom." But it's short-lived, and my husband is retired military. I'm military. We understand the fight for freedom is right here in Idaho, and this is way better than a deployment to Afghanistan.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Although I'm certain there are some similarities. We may get into that. I don't know. But it's interesting you talk about that because I've been telling folks in the legislature, folks who've expressed interest in running for office, that this is hard work, and that in order to save America, you have to do hard things. And we've been kind of talking about the the changes that have occurred. You've been in the legislature for, was this your third term? Is that right?
Correct.
Um, and I don't know. Did you tell me in the span from when you started to today, how much have the issues changed?
Mm. You know, ever since this whole COVID crisis has hit, that has been the focus. But the reality is that over the last 6 years, the issues haven't changed that much. I mean, our state budget has almost doubled in the last 6 years. So we're spending like drunken sailors. That hasn't changed. And giving away our authority to this growing government, that hasn't changed. And now we're just seeing more people who are recognizing it as their freedoms are being taken away from them. And so the group of those that are aware and now watching is getting larger and larger. And we're seeing more people starting to push back at school boards and local level and at the state level too. We've never had more people interested in running for the legislative seats than in my entire experience.
That's a very interesting way of putting it. I always felt like when we started the Freedom Foundation 13 years ago, the conversation was about tax policy and urban renewal and getting rid of a regulation here and there. And it just seems and we always sort of understood that, at the end of the day, it's all about freedom. But now there's this parade of characters out there who have learned to become mini dictators. And so it's become real for people what all these little policies that were so aggravating before were all about. So do you I mean, you see it growing on the outside. Is the same thing happening in the legislature? Are your colleagues also in this space where I'm fighting for freedom, I'm fighting for America, or do they kind of see it as business as usual, same as it's always been?
I've actually been surprised too when you look at the close votes, because in the legislature we go through hundreds of bills, hundreds of votes, and really a small percentage of them are close votes. And when I first got in, I always remember the vote count was 48 or 42 to 28 over and over and over again. And I've actually been surprised to see in some of the close votes recently that it's actually some of them it's actually decreasing, where we're just getting 50 to 20 in some cases.
Huh.
Now, mind you, today we did have out of nowhere, we were able to kill a supplemental budget.
Yeah, that's the house I remember.
Right. And I almost, it's this weird paradigm shift. I mean, you have those of my colleagues who are fearful of losing this upcoming election. And so they are acting much differently than they have in the past. But you also have $20 billion of extra money fake money that's flooding in from the federal government. And people are kind of, we're spending everything, spend. But then once in a while, there's a vote here and there where we're actually voting to stop that spending. So I don't know that it's there. People are acting very differently right now.
Are they acting more conservatively, or are they acting? What are you seeing exactly in terms of behavior change?
I don't know that I can dissect it. I feel like it's different on every issue. There are some issues that they're more conservative and others where they're not. I mean, we really should not be spending our grandchildren into eternal indebtedness. But in the budget committee meetings this morning, I mean, the spending is just flying through there.
I heard that actually in the Commerce Committee yesterday. There was a bill, and it came from Scott Syme, a noted conservative legislator, or I mean, noted Republican. Well, he's a legislator from Canyon County.
Who wears a mask?
Yes, all the time. I'd love to have Scott Syme on. That would be really fun. Make a note of that, Dustin. I would love to have Scott Syme. But he was in the committee yesterday presenting a bill which passed. It's going to be on the floor soon, I'm sure. Creating an Idaho workforce housing program. And in that bill, the state's going to create a housing workforce plan, and he says, well, it's going to be funded with money from the federal government, and acknowledged in the course of that, in his testimony and his debate in favor of the bill in committee, that that money was going to be paid back by our kids and grandkids and maybe their grandkids.
Yeah.
And I was sort of shocked by that. But I guess the question that I have for you is, he said something that I think you hear a lot, which is, well, if we don't spend that money, then some other state's going to spend it. We may as well spend it here in Idaho. How do you answer that?
Well, I think hmm, there's a breakdown in understanding the way indebtedness happens. I mean, when a country is $20 trillion in debt, and we're over 140% of our GDP to debt ratio, no nation has been able to survive that. And so, what does that look like when we start to fail or the market starts to fall? It's not just owing your debtors. Now we're talking about enslavement and servitude for the next generations. I mean, a lot, you can almost compare it to these mandates. If you have to take the shot or you're going to lose your job. And so now they're putting this requirement on you where you can't make money for your family. And that's the bondage and the servitude I think that we are putting in jeopardy here for our grandkids. It's not, they can't repay it. I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars per taxpayer. They're never going to be able to repay that, but they're going to have to sacrifice their freedoms as an American. And to me, that is a greater cost than just owing money. And that's where I fear there's kind of a mental breakdown there as far as a reality check. We need a reality check.
Why is that lost on your colleagues, though? I mean, it seems to me the hard vote here, and I tend to think that the hardest things to do in policy are usually the right things to do. It's easy to pass a bill that gives money to somebody or some interest group or whatever. Voting that down is very, very difficult. But the argument you just made to do that is extraordinarily compelling. Great, we built some workforce housing for you. Sorry, you don't have a means of being able to pay your own bills because your taxes are so high because of the debt that we accrued, and your dollar has been devalued
Yeah.
substantially. But I mean, when you go back to your district, when you've been traveling the state and you explain this to folks, what do people say?
There's probably a variety of things. Probably people who've been to other countries where they didn't have freedom. You oftentimes you don't realize that there's an absence of freedom until those freedoms have been taken away. And I think that's why a lot of people who are moving to Idaho, who are refugees, why they are helping push back, because they are coming from a place where they lost their freedom. And now they can see that we're losing it right here in Idaho. And so now they're willing to fight back and to push back. Those that maybe have never seen that loss of freedom, they're more complacent and maybe don't fully understand the ramifications. So, everybody has different perspectives, right? And also the lack of knowing and studying history. I mean, in the classroom, they're just not teaching real history anymore. And we see that with this whole woke agenda, social justice that you guys are experts on. Um,
We've done a lot of research
yeah,
on it.
so lots of layers. I don't know that there's one answer.
So when you travel around and you go to particularly Republican events, Lincoln
Mhm,
Day events, or Central
mhm.
Committee meetings, Republican women, and so on, there still seems to be a lingering, we call it the establishment group, the folks that, they feel their job is to be the cheerleaders for the Republican leaders, whatever they say, whatever they do. Oh, yay, Brad Little, or yay, I don't even know. Can't give me names all of a sudden. Isn't that terrible? Brandon Wolf. Wow. It's been a long day, everybody. Give me a break. But they see them, and their job has historically been, they view themselves as the cheer squad for the Republican Party. And then you have these other folks who say, no, we're not the cheer squad, we're the team owners, and we want to know why you haven't scored a touchdown in 4 years. You promised us this, this, and this, and you haven't delivered. So what's happening with that? How do you view that schism, and who's winning in that battle?
Right. So, what you're talking about is the civil war inside the Republican Party in Idaho, right? Because there's no litmus test to determine who's a Republican. Anybody can claim to be a Republican. And so we have a lot of people with very global ideologies who are in the Republican Party. And now they foot stomp all the positive things. And we all love Idaho. We live in Idaho for a reason. And so when they use their top three things of low unemployment rate and extra money in the bank and
Right.
people moving here faster than any other nation, those are their three talking points, and they beat them into the ground every time. That we're a conservative state, and but they're also failing to look at some of our weaknesses and the downfalls and the problems that we're seeing in our schools and with work and taxes and these global companies moving in, Meta, and the water problems, right? And so I think with good leadership means looking for the future and making a plan, look at your weaknesses and strengthen those to plan for the future instead of just reveling in the current status quo. And that's what we have seen in the legislature, is that it's very reactionary to problems instead of planning for the future. And I think Idahoans see that. In the upcoming election, May 17th, will definitely, I think, be the deciding factor on if enough Idahoans are recognizing that and knowing to stop watching television, the local news, and to actually pay attention um, to real news sources, and to be able to decide what the future of Idaho is going to look like.
How many of your colleagues do you think fall in that camp of what you just described, this sort of status quo, not really projecting out far into the future, not thinking about the sum total of the impact of their policy decisions? I mean, is it majority? Is it
It's a supermajority. So there are 105 legislators, there are 20 Democrats, and there are 20 to 30 conservatives on a good day.
on a
So
good day?
so if you add up the Democrats with the conservatives, there's 50, so 55 who are more of just the more progressive Republicans who go along to get along and enjoy the status
Are
quo.
are they at all Republican? I mean, or did they I mean, it's hard to, people aren't monolithic, and I'm not really trying to box you in, but I'm really trying to get an understanding of what your viewpoint on it. Are they Republicans and they maybe don't understand the platform? Did they run as Republicans because they couldn't win as Democrats and they really wanted to be in office?
Well, our current Speaker of the House refused to sign a pledge to sign the Republican platform that he would adhere to it. So I think that's a good indication for you that it's not about the platform and the Republican ideals for those 55. It's more of, I think, associated to special interest money and those outside pressures.
I really want to ask Scott Bedke that question too, by the way. He's been invited. I believe we've invited everybody to be on the program. So even Democrats, liberal Democrats, we love to have liberal Democrats on here. I had Lance Clow on the other day. Oh wait, did I say that out loud, or was I just thinking that? Wow, that's going to come back to haunt me. Okay. So anyway, tell me where you fit in then in this whole structure, because it looks to me like you, Ron Nate, Heather Scott, perhaps Dorothy Moon, I'm sure there are others that I could name as well,
Yeah.
find themselves on the conservative end of the spectrum,
Yeah.
and they're fighting with these other people. And people look at that and they go, "What in the heck is going on here? What does that mean?"
So I guess what's your question as far as where do I find
Where
myself?
where does how do you fit into that whole superstructure of how do you make that work, I guess, on a day-to-day basis where you've got a supermajority of Democrats and Republicans who are on the other side. They're linked arms, they have a supermajority, and you're on that other that what do you do with that?
Right. So we're in a losing battle, and all we can do is expose corruption. And so you see that over and over again, whether it's in the budget committee where we have 18 progressives against two of us conservatives. We just vote no every time, and it's 18-2. But we bring attention to what's going on. And the same is true for a lot of the bills. And right now we're getting steamrolled. Conservative ideals are getting
What are
steamrolled. And
examples of those that you see?
well, I guess you could see all of any of the conservative ideas are not even being allowed to go through the Senate. And all the big spending is just rolling through. So just today, a motion to in the budget committee, $50 million for extra. You might have to remind me the exact, but it was extra of this ARPA money,
Mhm.
just an extra $50 million. I mean, and we're
Ju
outvoted every time.
What was the vote, 18-2? 18-2, I just guess it. It used to be they had, 4 Democrats on the committee, and it was 16-4, where the Republicans were all linked together. Now the Democrats and Republicans are all voting together, and except for you and Ron Nate, and maybe occasionally pick up Wendy Harman or something.
Right.
Was the budget committee stacked to be that way, or is that just how it happened?
Well, the Speaker of the House picks all the members of each committee, and so obviously it's stacked to spend and to grow government
There doesn't
rapidly.
seem to be any. The other really interesting thing is, by the way, since you're on the budget committee and we just started talking about the budget, I really
Yeah,
want to get into the budget.
yeah.
I love talking about the budget, maybe more than I should. But um, just starting with the basics, there's no effort, there's no mechanism for the public to even have a say on how that money is spent.
Right. No public testimony
That is
allowed.
extraordinary. Have you asked anybody about that and what can be done to fix that?
It's the chairman's call, Speaker of the House. It's their call, and it's tradition.
Is there some value in not having the public being able to testify in committee?
You can expedite your spending. That is the value.
So when you see the agency heads come in, they put them on parade one after another. Here's
Hmm.
the head of DEQ. Here's the head of the Department of Health and Welfare. Here are the university presidents, and on and on and on.
Yeah.
Um, do you see? I mean, is there opportunity in there? Do you see things where somebody from the general public might go, "Wait a minute, he just proposed spending $2 million on social emotional learning. Here's my perspective on that."
No, no public input. I mean, really
It's
the only
crazy.
input I get is when I put out my budget bummers in my newsletter every week, and I share some of the surprising things that make it through the budget. And people respond to me. I ask for their input, but other than that, there's no public input.
Has any of the members of the committee ever said to you, this really is a problem. We need to do something about this.
No.
And why is that?
I don't know.
Are we just, is it sort of just entropy?
I think
Inertia, I guess is better word for it.
yeah, but the reality is that they're in the majority. When there's 18 of them, they can do whatever they want, and they want to do whatever the 220 plus state agencies, boards, and commissions are telling them to do in cooperation with the governor. And so they really strongly believe that they're doing what's best for Idaho and the supermajority of Idaho.
At the end of this session, will the legislature spend less than the governor, the same as the governor, or more than the governor?
Looks like more than the governor. I'm seeing, so normally the governor provides the recommendation on how much he wants to spend. But what I'm noticing is several recommendations higher than the governor. One would be employee compensation.
That's a big one.
Yes. So basically, the committee, and it was, I think, Scott Syme who led the charge, decided to reimburse state employees more than what the CEC, so that's the committee who works on that. They made a motion to increase more than what the governor's recommendation is. So state employees are looking at a like 7% increase.
Their argument was something to the effect that, well, inflation's a problem, and we've got to go and keep employees here just the same as the private sector does. What's going to be your leading argument against that when the time comes? When you're going to vote on every single budget, it's going to include that CEC figure, and then when it gets to the floor, you're going to have that same debate all over again. What's your leading argument going to be against?
Well, the argument for CEC is kind of that ship has sailed, right? Because you vote on whether or not to approve the 7% pay raise, and then that gets inputted into every single bill. And so you can't really continually debate CEC in every single bill. Now you're going to be voting on the merits of each individual bill. But I think one of the concerns is, and that's why I really appreciate Representative Ron Nate, who's an economics professor and is on the budget committee with me, is he sees the economic impact when you have skyrocketing prices and you're taxing those higher prices, then you're automatically going to have more tax money coming into the state. So then to try to pay more employees more money, it actually is not a wise thing to do in a year where we're getting this balloon of federal money, $20 billion, when our state budget's only about 11 billion. So it's just it's creating a spiral effect of just growth that is unsustainable.
I mean, I keep asking about your colleagues. I guess I shouldn't ask about your colleagues because you don't know. But it would seem that somebody there, even in the moderates and liberals, would be saying, "Gosh, yeah, this thing's going to come to an end, and it's going to be a horrible train wreck."
I think people have rose-colored glasses on, and
They have
life is good.
rose-colored glasses. Are they doing it because they figure it's going to sell with their constituents? That somehow it'll make them more electable?
Everybody wants more stuff. I mean, like just today, millions and millions of dollars for our veterans facilities and services. I mean, who's going to vote against veterans? We have to support our veterans, Wayne.
Well, yeah, well, and I was looking at that proposal, and I can't remember what it was, but it was some colossal figure per room for each one of, what is it, 165 rooms or something like that?
It's almost $800,000
Per room.
for 60 veterans.
I found that to be amazing. No one's talking about that, but you're right. There's this sort of, oh, we can't talk about veterans, we can't talk about seniors,
The deaf and the blind.
the deaf and the blind, anyone with a disability.
Yeah.
We're not allowed. We have to support them no matter what, even if the policy is
Healthcare.
odious.
Yep.
So let's talk some more specifically about some of the items in the budget that we've been watching very, very closely, which includes things like the college and universities.
Yeah.
And I've asked everybody who's come on the program, even folks who aren't on the budget committee or aren't on education, what should happen with that? You had, first of all, you were there. Marlene Trump from Boise State came in, Scott Green from U of I came in, Kevin Satterley from ISU, and those are the big ones. Lewis Clark State College, I think, has some issues, but maybe not as big as the 3 U's.
Yeah.
Do you buy what Marlene Trump is selling when she says that her programs for social justice have evolved?
Uh, I don't know what she's selling, unfortunately. But as far as them evolving, what I see are and hear are from students who feel like they're being discriminated against, and graduates who are embarrassed to call BSU their alma mater,
Mm,
and mothers who pulled their children out of the daycare at BSU because they were indoctrinating them with racial books that are just un-American. And that to me is very alarming. And donors pulling money from the institution. And so it's being backfilled by hundreds of millions from free federal money. This is just an indoctrination center, and they're having a hard time finding jobs, and they're coming out of college with debt. And so there are a lot of concerns with our colleges and universities, but it's just being ignored, the concerns, and everyone's just focusing on what they think is the positive outcomes. And they keep focusing on that word. It's outcomes. Oh
right,
boy.
so, well, we can talk about outcomes if they really wanna get into not what they say it is.
Yeah.
But okay, so Ron asked Marlene the question,
Yeah.
"We told you to cut at Boise State $1.5 million." Her answer was, "Well, our programs have evolved." She didn't identify anything.
Right.
Scott Green shows up from University of Idaho, presents a report that they commissioned a law firm to do about the Freedom Foundation, where
Mm.
they say, "Oh, nothing to see here, no social justice." Do you buy that about University of Idaho?
No, we get examples all the time from students. I mean, they're sending us their coursework. We know that it's just the president of the state board is saying that we're chasing ghosts, and the reality is that they're just ignoring the problem.
Why is that?
Why are they ignoring it?
Yeah, I mean, do they sincerely I'm not trying to get you to go inside people's heads, but you must have an opinion. Do you think that they sincerely believe that there's really nothing happening, or are are they just flat out lying about it?
I don't think they see a problem. They believe in social justice,
That's what
and
it is. They believe in it.
it's a faith.
Faith is a very big word.
Yeah.
Are you saying that they are um, devout followers of it, that they defend it, the way they would defend their
Uh,
religion, their belief in God, their belief in their church?
it appears that way.
Wow, that's a lot.
Not really.
You don't
It's a
think so?
lot of people who believe it.
How bad do you think it is?
I think there's probably depends on where you go. In Idaho, I think there's probably good 30-40% of Idahoans who truly do believe that we're inherently racist.
Are those people in positions of power? Are they in elected office or holding appointed or
Yeah, probably. I mean, probably all gamuts. Um, we see them in the north end of Boise a lot.
well, I'm speaking more,
Yeah.
at the Capitol and the people that you hang around with. Are you
Yeah.
seeing folks that are they're social justice warriors?
Yeah, a lot of state employees. I think that's where you're going to see a lot of it. And a lot of people in Idaho don't realize what's going on. They don't realize that there's specific training for this, for social justice
They also really don't
advocacy.
seem to understand also that it's not like when they have it in school, it's not, "Okay,
Yeah,
kids, time for CRT 101." It's
yeah,
more an undercurrent. It's sort of
right.
baked into the various ways things are taught and the way students are to perceive themselves and others.
Yeah, an example would be with the AVID program, right? It's for advanced learners in schools districts across Idaho, and teachers love AVID. And I have highlighted one of the pieces of their curriculum that is a privilege walk,
Yep,
where
we do
there's
too.
45 questions where these teachers are asking students to take step forward or step backward based on maybe the racial profile of their family or their education profile, and pure discrimination. And so this is just one example of this social justice ideology and critical race theory being used right here in Idaho in Avid. And I had a teacher very defensively just kind of attack me and say, well, you're saying all teachers are bad. And those AVID programs have helped so many kids. You can't, just because there's this one thing, you can't discredit the rest of the program. Well, that was never my intention. I wasn't trying to discredit the rest of the program, but we have got to cut out this racial discrimination that's inside the curriculum, or else it's a cancer that continues to grow.
The point was to say that it's there.
Right.
It's part of it.
Right.
And maybe it's something that they don't even realize is how significant, how important it is in the leftist agenda.
Right.
So, okay, we have all of this woke stuff. It's buried into the system. Elected officials, hired state employees, commissions, boards. It runs everywhere. It's in cities and counties, and you're on the budget committee. So, well, if I guess, what do you do about that then? How do you view, say, let me go back to the college and university budget, because I don't think anyone's going to defund Boise State, U of I, ISU, and so forth. They're still going to get money, but that necessarily means then some of that money is going to go to things that we won't like. How do you stop it? How do you stop this? How do you stop the bulk of it? How do you get the universities back to their core mission?
I think the answer to that is the answer to everything I'm hearing from constituents who are concerned about mandates and masks and businesses being shut down and churches being shut down and colleges that are, teaching social justice. And it all comes back to the executive branch and the governor of your state. Elections have consequences. The governor controls all of those things. And we're not going to get, I would say, solid, conservative, not necessarily even conservative, but strong colleges until we have a leader in the executive branch that exhibits courage, like we see in Governor DeSantis.
In Florida, the governor appoints the state board. The state board hires the presidents of the universities, and then the presidents of the universities go and run their schools. The legislature said, cut $2.5 million from social justice. The governor signed that bill. Who's most to blame for the fact that the schools ignored you?
So the executive branch is the enforcement arm of the law. It's absolutely, all the responsibility falls on the executive branch, in my opinion.
So you blame the governor then for not doing anything about that?
Absolutely.
So what do you think he should have done?
You hold the line and you enforce the law. And that's what I think Idahoans expect from good leadership. But we're seeing a trend where the law is being blurred, the bounds of the law is being expanded, and that is negatively impacting our entire state, even down to elections, Second Amendment laws, things that we're fighting in the legislature right now, working on bills because the law is being blurred.
So the governor, you passed the bill, $2.5 million cut. Governor signed the law. No one followed that. No one did anything. Let's say that you were the governor. What would you have done?
I would absolutely, well, first of all, there was $20 million being used for social justice
At
ideology.
minimum, and you cut $2.5 million. It was basically a rounding error. You weren't really telling them to really break a sweat.
Right. So the $2.5 million in my world wouldn't have even been a consideration.
Oh, so you're saying if you had been governor, it would have been a larger number.
Right.
Okay, fair enough. But
and we would have had a new state board and new presidents too.
That's what you would have done. You would have.
Absolutely. You have to hold people accountable. When the Constitution says students should not be categorized by their race or their color, and no political ideologies in those books should be in the schools, you hold the line and you say none. None means none.
It's weird though that, I mean, you and your colleagues wrote the budget, or passed the budget. Are the members of JFAC equally angry that they were ignored?
Maybe publicly, but
I would love to see examples of publicly also, but,
The other thing that I have found in my 6 years of experience is it's called pass the buck,
mm,
and everybody is really good at
very good at
passing the
passing the
buck.
buck. One of the things that I keep hearing on the pass the buck theme is, "Oh, well, I think the money might come from dedicated funds, meaning student fees. So I've got to find out more about that. And if it comes from the general fund, that's different. But if it comes from student fees, why, that's okay. Do you care? Does that make a difference to you?
Absolutely, because that's money coming from our students and our parents and our hard-working families across the state. So that revenue is still coming from people in one form or another.
So is that argument, what is that based on? Is that just something somebody came up with as an excuse to not deal with the problem? Or do they legitimately think that you're not supposed to deal with agencies that have fees, and fees are in a whole other bucket?
Yeah, it's just another bucket of revenue, and it's when it comes out of the general fund, it seems like there's more impact maybe as opposed to that dedicated money. That's yeah. I I, I think
It's all
it's
the same. It's
semantics.
all the same,
It's
right?
all
That's
yeah,
what I thought
yeah.
too. So, all right, you're not the governor, you're not
Not
lieutenant
yet.
governor, not yet. Okay, but uh, what would you expect that the legislature should do with this now? This college and university issue where they've not changed anything. They've had 3 years to get their act together. They were warned about it in 2019. The legislature was specific, get back to your core mission in 2020, actually cut money in 2021, and now it's 2022. What's your expectations gonna happen with that?
In my world, I think I'd start taking it out of the governor's budget.
Okay, but we're
But
not.
the reality is that we just don't have enough votes to do anything, Wayne.
You're not gonna do anything? They're gonna get away with it? You really believe that's what's gonna happen?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
Last year, there were members of the House that were willing to vote down the college and university budget when it only cut $400,000.
Yeah.
This year, they're gonna say, "Okay, you didn't cut anything, you've done nothing. The LGBTQ office is still open in the University of Idaho campus, the Gender Equity Center is still open, you
Yeah.
still have chief diversity officers, you have all these degree areas that are focused on social justice as part of the core
Yeah.
mission," and the answer is gonna be, "Alright, you win."
Yeah, it's an election year.
You would have think I would have imagined that in an election year, the reverse would be true, that people would be more adamant to demonstrate how conservative they are and how they're not gonna put up with the leftist stuff.
I hope you're right. And, we'll probably see
But
here in the next week.
you have a front row seat to it, so I'm saying you must have a perception that really what you said is probably true, that, no one's gonna do it. No one's gonna be held accountable.
No.
That's amazing. That's really absolutely stunning.
But maybe a lot of other people will just get in their big rig trucks and join the trucker rally instead. So
It might be something worth doing. I suppose that if you have nothing else left, right? What other budgets are you? I wanted to ask about just the budgets generally because there's so many of them. What ones are you looking that are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're asking for this.
I like to beat up on public television every year.
Oh, God bless you for that.
Yeah, because they want to grow their budget more, and they continue to use your taxpayer money to promote a lot of the social justice ideologies right into the homes of our kids. Like I won't let my kids watch it anymore because they're talking about how white parents are the problem. Um, so that's always a fun one too.
Last year, you came within one vote of killing that budget.
Mhm.
Interestingly, Ben Adams was on the program the other day, and I asked him about that because he told me he's going to support the public television budget because his kids love public television. And we had this discussion about taxation is theft and proper rule of government and so on. Um, but what he was one of the votes that voted no, but it was because he had a substitute that day.
Yeah.
And so it seems as if that's not even going to be a fight this year.
No.
Extraordinary. Even with
Yeah.
all the social justice stuff going on, people are just gonna let it go.
Yeah.
I always kind of wondered why it is that we always talk about, man, those public television people and National Public Radio, they're terrible, and Congress should really do something about that. And Congress really should. But here in Idaho, you have an 85% Republican legislature that can't vote to get rid of public TV or state general fund support for National Public Radio's megaphone in the valley, which is Boise Public Radio, Boise State
Yeah.
Public Radio.
Yeah. There are 85% that have an R by their name, but there's really only about 20
That's the
who
reason why.
don't think that.
Do, do you think that's really what it is? That the reason that they support public television is because they're not really committed to the Republican Party platform?
If you read the platform and then you compare it to what's shown on some of those TV shows, absolutely.
That's shocking. You can't even get a vote to get rid of the state general fund support for public radio. I'm not even saying get rid of it. Just, I mean, I would love, yes, I am saying get rid of it. But I'm saying for the purposes of this legislature, it's
Yeah.
probably maybe $500,000 that tax, but it's not a huge amount of money. You can't even excise $500,000 that goes to the public broadcasting services, radio service in Boise and in Idaho and Pocatello.
We can try, but I mean, just today we mandated business require 6 months of birth control to
That was
their
in the Senate.
employees
That was
in
in
the
the state
Senate.
Senate.
Yep.
That's really
I mean,
true.
so if we're going to be mandating birth control on people, what makes you think that we can get rid of public radio?
I wanna get back to that, but I really wanna what else do you look at? For example, last year, there was a huge fight over lieutenant governor's budget,
Yeah, there will
which
be another fight
which
this
you
year.
yeah, I'm sure there will, which
Yeah.
and you won the fight last year,
Right.
but there was so much time and energy devoted to that, and yet no one's talking about the not even an elephant.
Medicaid.
Yeah, it's not an elephant in the room, it's a whale. It's ginormous, and it's the biggest program in all of state government. What has to happen to get the legislature to take action on that?
I think back to getting a new governor.
It's really about that.
Yeah.
Are there members who are talking about this maybe quietly that they're going, "Oh, this is a real thing. We gotta go do something." By way of reference, the Medicaid budget itself today is bigger than the general fund was, what, just even a couple of years ago.
Right.
It's huge.
Yep. And hundreds of millions of, inaccurate payments and even supplementals for last year because we continually underestimate how much it's actually going to cost taxpayers. In the meantime, though, and this wasn't this year, but a year or two ago, we have people like Speaker of the House voting to increase free dental care as part of Medicaid. So you're just continually trying to grow government.
Who is behind the fact that that issue is not being addressed?
Which issue?
The
Or
Medicaid issue. Who's what stands in the way of the legislature itself taking that? I understand you need leadership from the governor's office, but there's gotta be some effort, somebody out there saying, "This is the biggest problem we face on the state expenditure side. This thing is out of control."
No, there's really no. I think I don't hear anybody talking about that except for maybe the work that you're doing. But yeah,
I'm not in the legislature. None of my staff is in the legislature,
right,
thankfully, but
right.
so no one's talking about that.
We're outnumbered
Why is the Medicaid budget less important than the lieutenant governor budget?
because it's helping people and people who don't have money, who are college students that need free health care. That we have to care about those people, Wayne.
Yeah, but isn't there somebody out there? I mean, I kind of for years, and I don't know the new figure. I need to go get the latest data. But for many years, we were at a place where half the babies born in Idaho were born on Medicaid. Is that a crisis?
Not if you like socialism.
Oh,
Because in Europe, everybody's on the government program, right?
oh, I did read in my high school government book that America has, been thankfully getting to be more like Europe. So, it's all
Absolutely.
really, really great now that we've learned to adopt some of the socialism.
You'd
from.
actually, I am surprised, or not really surprised, but a lot of what the Democrats proposed in personal bills this year were policies likened to that of Europe. I kept thinking, so I lived overseas in Germany for a while. I was active duty military, and they have a lot of special healthcare things, a lot of paid time off, maternity leave, paternity leave, those things, and we're seeing lots of policies by the left, just like Europe.
And by the left, you're not just talking about the Democrats, to be clear, you're also talking about the Republicans.
Right.
Yeah, so over in the Senate, you mentioned before that the contraceptive bill, 6 months of free contraceptives, I think is what the policy is calling for, passed the Senate. What do you think the odds are of that passing the House?
Ooh, I don't know. I'm hopeful. It might be a really close vote.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, back to that vote count of 42 to 28, but like you said, in an election year, we might have a few more who will vote against it.
It's weird because, that's one of those business mandates that I heard the Senate saying earlier that they weren't terribly fond of,
Well, I
when
I
they're
think the House today, we spent hours, it felt like, talking about whether or not businesses could mandate a shot or a mask.
explain the difference between the government mandating, contraceptives and the government mandating that you shouldn't tell people they have to put a vaccine in their body, for those who don't understand the difference.
Yeah, there is no difference, and that's why the hypocrisy, or back to that pass the buck, right? You know, on the floor of the House when debates start flying, it's like everybody uses the same excuse just depending on what side of the argument they wanna be on. So
May I say that you sound very jaded about the legislature?
and this will be my last year in the legislature, so
Did
rightly
you
so. I think
did
they
you
call it
feel
council.
that way when you first got in?
No.
What were your expectations when you arrived 6 years ago?
Yeah. When I first got here, I was actually really excited to try to guide Idaho policy to just continue to be strong conservative state. I had no idea that we were in the process of doubling our budget as a state. I had no idea that we were losing conservative values left and right, to losing our freedoms, really. And so, no, I was a lot more optimistic then. I thought that I could use my training and my talents as a leader and a, negotiator with other military um, members across the world, that I'd be able to use that to help Idaho. And in reality, I've been kind of treated more like a mushroom and um, pushed to the side while this globalist agenda just steamrolls through our great state.
When did you realize that was a problem?
I would say probably the first year. The first year I showed up, and the Constitution says that, we need to read the bills. And there's a process that just says, no, reading the bills is, for um, for our ancestors. When that was also when they brought in a bunch of uniform laws, and I quickly learned what the Uniform Law Commission is and how basically they're trying to standardize all the laws for all the states, and so it's more of a global, like getting rid of state boundaries and the 10th Amendment. Those, and it just continued to build up until COVID and churches and businesses, and now we're at a breaking point.
It's interesting. I just wanted to go back to the whole thing where I thought it was strange too when I first saw it in 1995, and yeah, and you actually had to fight over the process. They become so sloppy in the House, where they get up and they're supposed to say they don't. The Senate actually does it right.
Yeah.
They get up and they say, "I ask unanimous consent that we dispense with further reading of this bill. The journal show has been read 3 times at least, section by section, placed before the Senate for final consideration." Whew, you think I've actually done it before. I just watched it so much. But over in the House, they got to a place where they actually did it correctly years ago. And now they just get up there and they say, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent. We don't read the bill.
Right.
And then somehow the journal clerk's supposed to miraculously deduce from that that meant that he also meant that his unanimous consent request was that we put together a really big lie that appears in the journal that says the bill was read 3 times at length, section by section, and placed before the body for final
Yeah.
consideration.
Yeah.
That's all make believe. It never happened.
Right.
I just that just tells you on a thing like that, we'll lie about this. What else will we lie about?
Right.
And that's just kind of how I view it.
Basically lie to Idahoans about how the legislative process works too. Right. I mean, we've gotten up to hundreds of bills that are not even allowed to go through the legislative process.
So there is the other interesting thing. There's been a fight over personal bills. How, why are personal bills so scary to the leadership?
Because it shifts the power structure. And because one of the roles that they've taken upon themselves as speaker, so Scott Bedke, Speaker of the House, he gets to pick who the committee chair men and women are, and then that provides control over what bills go through the process, and so that's a power grab. And I mean, you've even, I think, pointed out examples where personal bills have been allowed to go through the legislative
They
process
have.
historically, but not under this regime.
So I know you got here in 2015, but what then changed to make that? I mean, personal bills did in fact get introduced and passed into law. Personal bills, more or less, more often will just sit and fester. But at least it was an avenue to get something put on the radar if you
Mhm.
ran into obstacles or some kind of
Mhm.
institutional opposition. What has changed that now makes personal bills so scary that it can't? Are the bills more controversial than they used to be? Or are they?
No, it all goes back to the current Speaker of the House, who's wielding the power, and specifically grocery tax repeal. Right, he does not want to get rid of the tax on groceries because it is another source of revenue to double our budget. And now that we've doubled it, it's time to triple it, I guess. He just constantly wants to have that revenue there. When really, I think it's immoral to be taxing our food, especially when we have, a 40-year high on food prices. So that's the most controversial part. But there's a whole handful of bills that are not being allowed to go through the process. I mean, the one of mine that to me is just sickening to think about, but we have 14-year-olds who are being told they can get a shot without parental approval, and it's in the law that it's legal. And so we've
We're one of a
tried.
handful of states that actually have that policy.
Yeah, so we try to run it through the Health and Welfare Committee, and it is not even allowed a public hearing. And so, the Speaker of the House is close friends from the same district of the chairman of the Health and Welfare Committee, and they've colluded not to allow that law to change. And so we have children out there making decisions without their parents. And it just,
And you can't do anything about it.
right.
So Heather Scott, I think, made the comment the other day that, were she in charge, she would allow the Democrats a vote on the LGBTQ bills that they want heard year after year after year, for example.
Mhm.
Would you be comfortable with a process where the left gets to have a consideration of their bills as well as the conservatives?
That's the America history that I learned, is that when you have a legislator, they are allowed to bring a bill forward and it gets voted on up and down. I can't imagine it any other way except we're living it right now. And so, this concept that we're protecting people by not voting on something, to me, is a false sense of security, and it's more of a regime than it is a constitutional republic.
Wow, that's some big words there. A regime, huh? Is it really that bad?
Yes, it's worse than
Would you
bad.
call is it an oligarchy? Is it a dictatorship? Is it what is it?
Um, Probably, there's a lot of good words we can probably use, but uh, probably an oligarchy, I would say.
Controlled by just a handful of people,
Right.
and other people have no input, no ability to get there.
Yeah.
The thing about the proposals from the left, I always found that if your arguments in support of your position are so great, then why couldn't you have a if the Democrats' LGBTQ legislation is so bad, and it is, it shouldn't be terribly hard to hold a hearing
Right.
to kill it, but at
Right.
least they've been heard.
Right. And another factor in this is the fact that the media is only supporting one narrative. And there's still a large percentage of Idahoans who believe and trust local media. And but we're starting to see that shift away a little bit. But when they have that huge platform to be able to advertise their agenda, um, that that hurts conservative values. And so that's why it's so important to have all these alternative media sites.
Do you talk to the press?
No,
You don't at all.
no,
Why not?
because not one thing they share ends up accurate.
Just checking. But your friends still do, your colleagues still do, and you're and you still have people throughout the state who read the paper, I guess. I mean, the Statesman still has more than two subscribers, I would imagine. The Press Tribune probably about 5, but they're still reading. How do you communicate with those people who invariably believe what it is they're reading or hearing on TV?
I don't think you do. I think you have to focus on the Idahoans who are frustrated and know that they're being fed a line of bull and just start to feed them information. And that's what I do with my weekly newsletters, and other legislators send out their newsletters as well. So email is that direct communication line with voters is really the best way.
So here we are in Idaho, the state that everyone says is one of the most conservative states. They view that by virtue of the legislative makeup. Um,
I think they view it by the percentage of people who voted for the Republican candidate
okay,
so they 64% voted for Trump. So they say we're a conservative state, one of the most conservative in that regard.
so how worried should people be about the future of the country if a state like Idaho can't even get basic policies correct? Is that something that you are worried about?
Absolutely. But I'm also a woman of faith, and I know that in the end, God wins. And so it's our duty just to continue to try to make it the best with what we have, and to continue to just love one another and to help one another when things get rough. And I think things are going to get rougher. And so we just have to continue to shed light on corruption, but yet be hopeful about our future.
It's still a very challenging atmosphere because I mean I've noticed even in committees and on the floor, it's very tense. It's very tense. The gloves have really come off with a lot of people. You've been called an extremist, for example,
Mhm.
which I don't think you probably count yourself as an extremist. But once you've been called that, how do you get into a place where you can communicate?
Well, I think you just continue to share the truth.
Doesn't that just make them angrier? That's been my experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can share that we're extremely concerned about the indoctrination of our kids, extremely concerned about these mandates that are killing people and causing people to lose their jobs. We're extremely concerned about the out of control spending, right? And so we can't just let them control the narrative and take our words from us. And so we just continue to I expose the corruption. It's every week I'm highlighting more and more corruption. So shoot me an email if you want my newsletters.
I do get your newsletters. Do you think that that people accept that reality, or are they more offended by the heated dialogue, the finger pointing, the accusations of ethics violations, the objections, the all of that? That's part of it. It seems that some voters probably look at that and go, "Oh, why can't we all just be friends? I mean, mostly Republicans. 80% agree."
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's just what percentage, and none of us will know until election day, right? And so we just have to try to continue to get the word
It
out.
would be easier though to just kind of go along. That is the standard protocol is to go along, get along, kind of resolve your problems behind closed doors. Don't make things into a big stink. Don't make people look bad.
Mhm.
You're going a very different direction.
For now, I might be an airline pilot soon enough.
Okay, so let me ask you about this other the procedural thing that's taking place on the floor, which
Okay.
is the fight over the grocery tax.
Right.
And for those of you who don't know about this because you've not read about it in your media, I mean, really, there's been almost no news coverage, which is interesting.
Right.
Virtually every day, there's been a motion on the floor to call the grocery tax repeal bill out of the Ways and Means Committee, which has lingered in for more than a month. Um, what's the atmosphere on the floor like with some of your friends and your frenemies who have watched this happen day in day out?
There's probably a little bit of frustration on both sides, right? I mean, how come we can't just let the process work? And then there are those who believe that the speaker should control what bills are allowed to get public hearings. And their loyalty aligns with the oligarchy, and their future career depends on their loyalty to the oligarchy.
What do you mean by that?
So we had one individual who was trying to supported calling the bill to the floor for a vote on grocery tax repeal. And that individual was reprimanded and said, that's potentially going to impact your position on a committee, could impact your future election. So there's a lot of closed door fear mongering going on, or strong arming going on. And that's been the case ever since, I've been in the legislature.
The idea
So-
being that if you're a vice chairman or you're a chairman, you're in any kind of position of leadership, then your job is to vote with the chairs of the other committees, I guess, the chairman of the committee who's asking the body to excuse from reporting the bill.
Right. And that's what they call the whole procedural. It's a procedural vote, which means
So over time, the number of people who've sided with the motion to call a bill out of committee has dropped. Is the strategy working?
maybe inside the chamber, but for people who are paying attention and for voters, I think they're on the losing side of history when it comes to obstructing the will of the people.
So you're saying that I don't want I hate when I start putting words in people's mouths, and I need to break that habit. But so you're saying that in the in the chamber, the perhaps it's not resonating with, maybe it's even making people angry that that's going on, and people out there aren't really getting it.
Right. So I think there's such a strong between 11 and 15 votes every
Yeah,
time we try to call it to the, but actually that number is growing since when I first got here. I mean, we were what, 5, 6, 7,
yeah.
and now we're growing. So over the last couple of elections, we've actually increased the number of conservatives in the House.
You have, but there's still not enough of them to call out the grocery tax repeal bill.
Right.
Why does the House go along with operating under such constraints? So you would think that individual House members would take the Speaker and the Majority Leader aside and say, I was here to represent 45,000 of my constituents, and you're denying me that opportunity. Why isn't that happening?
I think it's fear.
They can't even go to the Speaker and say, this process is terrible.
No.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, if they're so afraid, why wouldn't they vote for a new speaker? They're afraid to do that too.
It was a close vote.
That's
And
what I'd
so I
heard.
think, and there's going to be, so the current speaker will no longer, he's done, retired as speaker, right? So there is going to be a new speaker. So there's a lot of leveraging going on right now for who's going to be the
Ah,
new speaker. And so they're all counting, their allies.
and the allies are being determined by who votes on a procedural motion to pull a bill out of committee
Right.
and things like that. I suspect the same thing is also true on votes to kill budget bills,
Right.
where it used to be Okay, folks, you know that when a bill comes out of JFAC, everybody votes for it.
Right.
Everybody agree on that?
Right.
But there has been some movement on that, though. The House has been really good at killing budget bills the last couple of years, and they've demonstrating they still have it in them with the vote today.
Right. But it took 20 billion to cut a few million here and there. So I don't know that I would say that's pretty good.
No, well, I mean, it looks impressive, but I guess in reality, it's not much of anything. You're
Right.
right. I mean, they're not. Why such unwillingness to take on hard questions? Medicaid is hard. Tax policy is hard. The budgets, how to deal with vaccine mandates, how to fight the federal government.
Because everything's just going perfectly, Wayne.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
basically, what you do is you go around and you talk about how terrible Biden is, how wonderful it is that the budget is balanced. No, by the way, I'm pro-life. And
Yes.
winner, winner, chicken dinner. You too can be a state senator
Absolutely.
or a U.S. senator, even as the
Right.
case may be.
Right.
It's pretty messed up.
Yeah. If we had fair elections.
Yeah, fair elections certainly would have. Elections are a problem here in Idaho too.
Right. And we're finding more and more examples of that. And it's a little bit concerning. So definitely want to encourage people to volunteer to vote or yeah, vote,
Volunteer to vote.
work. The polls that are coming up. I foot stomp everywhere I go. Make sure you're affiliated with an actual party before March 11th, because there's a law sailing through right now that if you're unaffiliated, you're not going to be able to vote on May 17th.
How bad a problem is election integrity in Idaho?
Heritage Foundation ranks us 38th. Where we're digging into some concerns right here in the city of Meridian. We're not here in Meridian right now, but in the city of Meridian, down in the Treasure Valley, we had 20 individuals who voted, even though they had moved to another area just 4 months prior. So that's highly illegal. We still have people. We have a big situation in Ada County where we have underage people registering to vote, about 1,800 of them.
Wow.
Yeah. We had a situation where we have a dead lady up in Latah County who's on the voter rolls. We have about 20 individuals who are interstate voting, so they're voting in Idaho and in another state, or at least somebody's using their ID information for them to vote in another state. So lots of concerns that we're also looking at here in Idaho.
So when people say there's no election integrity problem in Idaho, you obviously don't buy that. You found evidence that that's actually not even true.
Right.
How concerning is that, given that you're running for statewide office?
It's very concerning, actually, because I've actually heard people in town hall meetings say, tell constituents that, I don't need your vote. And that phraseology right there, if somebody who's running for office says, I don't need your vote, that concerns me.
Wow. That's pretty shocking and damning all at once.
Right.
So is this a known quantity then among elected officials that the election system is messed up sufficiently that I don't need your vote, we've got it all taken care of?
I don't know.
That's a very big allegation, Priscilla.
For a candidate to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
I mean, so not to kind of jump to where we were or back to where we were in the 2020 election. Are you concerned that when you get to election day, that if the results end up being more favorable to certain candidates, including your opponent, that you think there's election fraud taking place?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a little bit tough too, because we don't have really strong laws for a remedy when you have fraud or problems with election integrity. And we saw that play out a little bit in the Meridian City Council race, where the election laws were violated and it could have significantly changed the results or the outcome of the election, and nothing was done. All the way up through kind of the judicial input, just oh, sorry, bummer.
Hmm.
So, and we also saw some concerns up in Coeur d'Alene race where they were trying to audit some of the ballots, and there was just a conflict of the law, and they weren't allowed to look at the race closer. So it's definitely, and we're trying to look at different angles and make sure that we have poll watchers and people working the polls, and that those people know the laws. Just like with these underage people registering, that's poll workers who don't quite understand some of the restrictions in the law, that 17-year-olds shouldn't be registering, and we shouldn't be inputting their data into the system. I mean, 1,800 of them being inputted. So,
1,800.
mhm.
Wow. So how much of that is malfeasance? How much of it is accidental? How much of it is planned?
I want to hope everything that we found is accidental. But that just means there's a lot of room for improvement from everybody, from those that are working the polls, and from voters themselves. I've had several voters across the state tell me that they showed up on election day just a few months ago, November of 2021, and were told that they had already voted.
Wow.
And so then you, as a voter, what are you supposed to do? What would you do if you showed up and they told you, sorry, you can't vote, you already voted? There's really no, what do you do? I mean, you can't call the cops, and so I think just one lady was given a felt tip pen to fill out, and they said everybody in this precinct is using it, but she knew, she'd seen what had happened in Arizona. She's like, well, I can't use that pen. They said, no, you have to. That's the only type pin that we're allowing people to use. But who does she call? What do you do? So just being an informed voter, and also being able to call elected officials and let them know what's going on. But we've got to keep track of these things as well, right? When the bus full of students shows up to the precinct, we need people out there with their cameras keeping track of this stuff. And I think this upcoming election, May 17th, will be probably, I mean, we're number one on the left's hit list to try to flip our state so we need all hands on deck to be looking for any irregularities.
We were at Lincoln Day in Canyon County last night, and I was sitting next to a lovely woman, and she was talking about um, how she was paying attention to what's going on in Washington, D.C., and what Biden is doing, and the controversy, or not the controversy, the conflict in Russia with Ukraine, and all that kind of stuff. And I started asking her about her state legislators. What do you think? What do you think of your state legislators? And she says, to be honest with you, I don't know who my state legislators are. Um, do Which is more of a problem, the election integrity or low information voters that don't really pay attention to what's happening in Boise?
I'd say low information voters first of all, because of all the election integrity issues. There's 30,000 names that should be pulled off the rolls because they're not voters anymore. But I don't know that we have we haven't identified any huge amounts of interference, and that's, mind you, we haven't looked at machines and some of these heart technology where I haven't looked into that, but low information voters for sure, because they are easily influenced by big pharma money. So big pharma is the number one contributor to campaigns in the state, and they're even training candidates. They have specific candidate training seminars for their blue. So this is your big pharma candidates that we're up against.
What are those guys after that they spend so much time and energy on Idaho elections?
I think money and power,
I
right?
mean, is it ultimately, for example, we get the right people elected and we can mandate everybody get a vaccine? Is that what you think is happening? Or is it more, I mean,
Vaccines are one aspect of their revenue, right? Look at the amount of revenue that it's you just said earlier, the health and welfare budget.
yeah, it's a crazy. So that's a huge part of it.
And a huge chunk of that is going to big pharma for all sorts of
Right.
services. And the price of and the cost of services is skyrocketing. We still aren't seeing how much services are required. I know Trump had that as he was leaving office, where he wanted costs for services to be required, but I still haven't seen that. Right. So, and then right, the same, they're not paying property taxes, and so it's quite the monopoly. And so many people are now medicated, and continually the Medicaid requirements are, you have to go into the doctor so often, get well visits for your children, even though they're not sick. Um, so it's quite the
See,
racket.
that's a very interesting thing. So you look at policies like that, and I'm always very suspicious. It's like, oh, a wellness program to make sure kids don't get sick. And I look at that and I go, oh, a wellness program to make sure you have a continuous supply of patients who are required to show up and be billed.
Exactly.
So you're more in that camp. How
Well,
much public policy do you think is actually derived by that?
by the cost or
No,
the
no, but
fact
how
that,
much public policy is a function of special interest groups just wanting certain things as opposed to in the name of public health and safety?
well, absolutely.
It's gotta
All
be
of it.
all of it. I mean, it really is. I mean, that's how I'm very suspicious of all of that,
Yeah.
and you are too. But, some of our friends in the legislature, you tell them that, and they think that you're a conspiracy theorist,
Yeah.
but the conspiracy is real. Right? I mean, it's like, yeah, every time that Fred and I had this conversation quite a bit, he went and testified against that workforce housing plan that the state workforce housing proposal, whatever.
Mhm.
And who wants that? Oh, it's for workforce housing. It's going to help the workers, and they're going to be able to have houses, and it makes so much sense. And then you hear the builders, the developers, real estate agents, all these different groups that benefit from it. It's not just about providing a public good, it's about getting some money, some Benjamins,
We're in the
as
wrong profession, Wayne.
clearly are. Okay, let's wrap this up. Anything else we should know about that you want to mention that's taking place?
I could talk the Second Amendment bill that I introduced this
Oh,
morning, but
please
otherwise,
tell me about the Second Amendment bill.
yeah, sure. So over the last 6 years, thanks to Idaho's Second Amendment Alliance, Idaho has gone from, I don't know, we were the 15th, 10th to tied for first for the most friendly, gun-friendly state in the nation. But the left is always trying to carve out their little inroads into how to take away your ability to carry a firearm. And the most recent ploy, you could say, is they specifically, there's several places across the state, but up in Sandpoint, there's a public park, and the city leased the park out to an organization to have a music festival. And then they put up signs and said, you can't bring a gun
Who
in.
who put up the signs?
It was, I guess, the company who's doing
The
the
music
music
festival
festival
company? Okay,
put up a sign saying you cannot carry a gun inside the music
remember
festival,
that.
but it's on public property.
Mhm.
Our law, constitutional right to be able to carry a gun on public property. And so the situation went to court, and an activist judge said when the city leased the property, they gave them property rights for a temporary amount of time, which then suspends your ability to carry a gun, which is totally unconstitutional in my mind. I'm sure it's being appealed, but what is happening is it's continuing to happen across the state. So at rodeos, and so hypothetically, we could have the city of Boise could section off a part of town or a park, and just deem it now a sanctuary.
They could lease it to anybody for $1, and then it would become a sanctuary for people who don't like guns because they're scared of
Yes,
everything.
exactly. And that is one way that these local municipalities can take away your
Mm.
ability to carry a gun.
I did not realize that the Constitution didn't apply anymore the moment you lease a piece of property. So do you not have, like, First Amendment rights on leased property? Can they search and seize your possessions on leased property? Is that how that works?
Well, exactly. So we've had judges uphold your First Amendment rights when property is
Oh,
leased,
oh,
but
but not the second. The Second Amendment is different
right,
because guns equal
right,
scary, equal must be
yes,
banned and stuff.
yes, all part of
Interesting.
the
So that's
destruction.
what your bill fixes that problem.
Yes, closes the
It's
loophole.
too bad that it's not really a loophole. It's just a misreading of the Constitution, of the law by this activist judge.
Yep,
Who
and
was the judge?
I don't know off the
I don't
top of my
remember.
head.
Okay,
Yeah.
but that was Scott Hernan's case, and yeah,
Yes.
yeah, he's appealing that. I presume.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Any other bills we should know about?
That's probably it for
That's
tonight, but
probably it for tonight.
thank
Okay.
you.
Well, thank you for being on the program. I really enjoy visiting with you. We can do this
Likewise.
all night, but and thank you for your hard work. It's not easy, and sometimes it's not fun. But
Oh,
it's
it's fun.
is it? Oh no, I don't know. Sometimes it really is not fun. Okay. Maybe you enjoy it more than I do.
Yeah, it's depressing, but it's fun.
Well, it's just it's disappointing that you have to drag a Republican-controlled legislature kicking and screaming towards freedom.
Yeah,
That's the thing that I just can't get over. It's like I believe in free markets, except for when I don't. Oh,
all the
okay.
time.
I believe in constitutional rights,
Yeah,
except for most of these bills that I'm going to vote for.
right. People are waking up.
They are waking up.
May 17th.
Thank you for what you're doing, and we'll be back again on Thursday. I think we've got. We were going to have Chuck Winder on, but Chuck Winder canceled. Can you believe that? I, for one,
Oh,
am shocked.
sorry.
Yeah, me. I really wanted to interview him. I was really looking forward to it. I hope maybe he had something come up. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. We're gonna have Dustin Manwaring, and then we're also gonna have a recap of KTVB, which is a TV station in Boise that they still have a few viewers watching the news, or what they call news, more propaganda. They're doing a three-part special on the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Dustin and I will do a takedown of what they said and what the reality is versus what you saw in the news report had you watched it. So thanks again for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.